back with Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy, who's in Moscow, Idaho right now. I'm also joined by former FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon. We're taking your questions right now about the Idaho student murders investigations for the next half hour. So keep those questions rolling in on our YouTube stream, Twitter, Facebook. We very much appreciate it. So, Bobby, I want to go to you. What do you think is happening behind the scenes in terms of, we know the Moscow Police Department is involved, but we know they're getting help from other outside agencies. And obviously, as we talk about, are there missteps in this investigation? Are there misstatements? What's happening behind the scenes? Are there mistakes being made? What do you think is happening behind the scenes, these interagencies cooperation?
Well, I think each agency is bringing to the case a different expertise. For example, the FBI, my former agency, probably lent FBI profilers to do a victimology study of these victims and see what the perpetrator might look like from a profiling standpoint. The FBI is very good at that. The FBI laboratory might be processing some of these things taken either from the crime scene, or we have a special photo unit that can enhance video or enhance photographs that are being, sent in by witnesses or people that want to help. So there's a number of different things that each agency might bring to the table, and hopefully the lead investigators who are responsible for the case are, maximizing all of those things and to the best effect. So I think that you have profilers that have come in, you have different crime labs that have different expertises that are probably coming in. There's a lot of DNA evidence from that house that has to be gone through. So I think that, I don't think it's a little too early to say missteps. I think that people sometimes think that things move quicker than they do in reality. And so I think that the drumbeat of the public for information can sometimes make it seem like missteps. But there's a lot of things to go through. Tons of witnesses, tons of physical evidence in this case, and the fact that each witness has a whole world of people around them that have to be examined, make it a very time and labor-intensive endeavor to carry out an investigation like this.
All right, so Anjanette, I'm going to go to you. We have a question from Monthy number 4 on Twitter, and if anybody follows Monthy number 4, just the really cute picture of a dog is the profile picture. That's just a little side question there. But anyway, Anjanette, the question from Monthy number 4 is, could you please try to identify the source that leaked any victim, Kaylee, was injured more than another? It seems like this was suggested by a Fox reporter 3 days ago, that he heard from his sources, and that was the first the Gonsalveses had ever heard of it.
Well, I saw that interview, and he did claim to have a source who was alluding to this. So we don't know who that source would be, unfortunately. We would ask. And I actually reached out to the coroner and spoke with her briefly yesterday, and she said there was nothing more she could tell me other than what was in the official release, saying that they were stabbed to death, all 4 victims. So we don't know where that piece of information came from, but in response to that question and in response to that suggestion, Kaylee's father said that he believed that was true, and he didn't say how he knew that, but he talked about how he paid for the funeral, so that he said he was entitled to that information. He knew that. So we don't know where he got that. I don't want to make any suggestions about where he may have gotten that, but it could have been, somebody from a funeral home. Who knows? We just don't know where that information came from. But the day, 2 days after that statement was made live on TV on Saturday. On Monday, 2 days later, the Moscow police said in one of their releases that they hadn't released any of the information about the nature of the injuries or any of that information to families or the public. And they said they've done that on purpose so that it wouldn't compromise the investigation. So we'd all like to know where that piece of information came from and whether or not it is indeed true that Kaylee's injuries were more brutal than her friend Maddie's. So we'd like to know where that came from and if it's indeed true.
Okay, now going to something that we talked about earlier, Bobby, we don't have the 911 phone call. We don't know exactly what was said. There are reports that who made the call, and there might have been multiple people in the background, said that someone was unresponsive. And the reason I ask you that is Mado Melker on YouTube asks, how did the roommates think that the victims were just unconscious if there was so much blood on the scene?
Well, we really don't know exactly what the roommates thought or believed. I mean, I think that I haven't heard the 911 calls or seen the transcripts of those calls. But remember, this is a very traumatic event. People sometimes aren't composed, and they say things that may not be accurate in the moment because this is a traumatic event that they're dealing with. So I wouldn't put too much, faith in, even when we do hear the tapes or see the transcripts, in what the people, I'm not saying they're lying, I'm just saying that during these traumatic events, people react differently and they talk differently, and the things that they convey are not always accurate, or they're different. So I don't, 911 calls are a world unto themselves. There's a lot of adrenaline running through them usually. There's a lot of trauma that people are processing at the same time as they're speaking. So I wouldn't put too much faith in, in concluding something about those comments because of the emotional state that the callers are usually in.
Over to you, Anjanette. Poke or Pokey on YouTube, not sure which way this goes, but Poke or Pokey, asks, did Zana and Ethan or Kaylee and Madison bring anyone else back to the house with them? Has that been confirmed?
We don't know that. Everything we've heard from the timeline established by the police was that the two surviving roommates arrived home at King Road around 1 a.m. and then that Kaylee and Maddie arrived around 1:56 a.m. By private vehicle, and Ethan and Xana arrived at 1:45. So we have those three times: 1 a.m. for the surviving roommates, 1:45 for Ethan and Xana, and Maddie and Kaylee at 1:56. So those are the times that we've been given when they arrived home. We haven't heard about anybody else coming home with them, but we know that Maddie and Kaylee arrived in a private vehicle, and that's how they were taken home.
Bobby, over to you. This is a question from Sonic Boss 91 on YouTube. Any news on the weapon or weapons used? Now, I saw initial reports that it was a military-style knife. I think their quote was a Rambo-style knife, a K-bar-style knife. Not sure it has been confirmed about that yet, but based on what we know of the stabbing attacks, do you anticipate that could be the weapon? Do you anticipate it was multi-weapons? I mean, again, I know it's so early, we don't have a lot of information. What are you thinking, though, in terms of the weapon? And also, it hasn't been recovered.
Yeah, well, I think, just based on the reporting that you cite as some of the same that I've seen, I believe it was and I think the coroner believes this, it was a sharp-edged knife. Probably a larger knife, probably could be a military-style knife, which, by the way, doesn't mean much because you can buy those in Army surplus stores or things like that. So, but I think that based on the wounds, that the limited amount of information we know about the wound so far, that it was a fairly large, sharp-edged weapon that was used, and also that obviously I think the killer left with the weapon and then, most likely disposed of it somewhere. Whether we will ever find it or not is an open question. I spent 19 years looking for weapons underwater and bodies underwater, and so I think that the killer probably took the weapon with them and disposed of it in a place where they don't think it's going to be found.
I want to go to another question, Anjanette, from this is actually an interesting one. It's from Malgorzada Z on YouTube. Why did the roommates decide to call 911? Did they see the bodies or the door was locked from the inside? Is it true the police don't know how many people passed by the house before the 911 phone call was made?
We know that we don't know about the doors being locked or not. There was some discussion about that. That's one of those things that's been kind of floating around on the internet, that maybe one of the doors, the bedroom doors, was locked, or maybe one person was outside the door. We don't know. We know that from all accounts that we've been given, that two of the surviving roommates called a friend over to the house because they believed one person was unconscious. We haven't been told who they believed was unconscious, and that all three of them called 911 on the two surviving roommates' phones. So we wish we could answer that question for you, but we just simply don't have that information. All
right. Well, these are great questions nonetheless. Keep them coming in on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. We'll do our best to read them on the air and hopefully answer your questions. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.